cut down on the ambient sound. So in any event, we're live, guys. We're a few minutes late. As you guys can see, we got a few new folks in here. We still got Bruce on his way. And so we'll give it a few minutes. Let some people jump in here, and then we'll get started. It looks like you already got a bunch of people watching somehow. So let me get one more minute here, and then give Bruce an opportunity to jump in. Since I do have some new people in the chat tonight, switch it up. Usually I go around and I'm the one that introduces everybody. I'm just going to go around the horn so you guys can introduce yourself. Just a quick little, intro about yourself. And, if you got your own respective YouTube channel or website or whatnot, you can mention that and let everybody know. Okay. So I'm going to start with John, and we're going to go just in that order.
Y'all know me, John from UW Gear and Alpha Charlie Concepts. And that's it. That's my channel. That's me. Short and sweet.
You're muted, Les.
Hey, I'm Les from Pegasus Tests.
Is that it, man? Is that all you got for us? All right.
Hey guys, what's going on? My name's UT74. Those who know me personally know my first name. It's Abner. I have a channel here on YouTube, Uniform Tango 74. Started back in 2007, 2008, and used to have a lot of videos. Now I don't. I left for a while. Now I'm making some more content and getting back into it. I also have an Instagram. I don't use the same handle. It was more for my artwork and my designs. It's called Heroes and Villains Reimagined on Instagram. If you guys, there are people on YouTube that follow me there. So that's pretty much who I am.
So, hey, my name is Matt Robertson. I run a little website called The Everyday Marksman, and fledgling new YouTube channel just getting started up. So Brent will be on Wednesday. So looking forward to that talk. And yeah, let's get going.
Yeah, hey, so a lot of you know me by Doc Larson or my YouTube channel, Christopher Larson. Other people will know me by my gay porn name, Sebastian Summers. But anyway, they're all good channels. You'll like them. Glad to be here.
Howdy, folks. I'm Chad. I served with Brent in Afghanistan. I'm a former Marine.
Hey guys, I think you all know me, Bruce at Camp Armament. That's both my YouTube and my Instagram channel. You may also recognize me from a couple cameo appearances with Sebastian Stallion's videos there, for those of you that follow him. But either way, I'm glad to be with you again tonight.
Sebastian, Jesus. Oh my goodness.
It's Summers. It's Summers. Sebastian Summers. How hard is that? You obviously don't follow my show.
No, absolutely not. All right, guys. So that's our panel tonight. If you guys notice, I got quite a few more individuals on here. So this is the first time that we've gone over 6. You had to have a membership to the Restream deal in order to go over 6. So, hey, with Black Friday, they gave me 50% off. So I was a sucker and I took it. So hope you guys enjoy the digital Marpat background and more than 6 people on this panel. I paid for it. So with that being said, here's our topic tonight. So we're going to have 2 topics of discussion. The first one is going to be there's reports that the Russians are massing troops near the Ukraine border. So that's the very first topic we're going to discuss on that. We'll kick around. And then the second topic we're going to talk about is how familiar are U.S. troops with foreign weapons systems, specifically enemy weapon systems, threat weapons? And we'll kick that around. And that goes from small arms all the way up into, mortars, indirect fire weapons, and, man pads, all that stuff. So just, how well do U.S. troops, and NATO for that matter, know the capabilities and limitations and how to use foreign and threat weapon systems? So with that being said, let's go back to our topic number 1, Russian troops massing near the Ukraine border. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick it over to Chad. He is going to kick this stream off tonight. So floor is yours, brother.
Appreciate it, Brent. I wanted to start off tonight with a little bit of history about how we got here. So after the fall of communism in the Ukraine, there was a rise in nationalism, Ukrainian nationalism. Around 2004, there was an election held. One of the men running, Viktor Yanukovych, was declared the victor and there was a lot of election fraud. There was a lot of election fraud in the 2004 election. So what happened after that was a revolution. It's called the Orange Revolution. And a pro-EU candidate eventually won. But in 2010, this Viktor Yanukovych was elected again. He was very pro-Russian. In 2013, he had made all these campaign promises to join the EU and stuff like that. Well, he reneged on his promises. And then you had a massive uprising in 2014. And you basically had two portions of the country were divided, the Donbass area and Crimea, where a lot of Russian separatists engaged in guerrilla warfare against the Ukrainian government and established, people's republics. So you had Russia that invaded Crimea and annexed Crimea in 2014. And since then, Ukraine has been battling these Russian separatists in the Donbass area. Yanukovych was officially ousted, but that's kind of how we got to where it was. That's kind of a down and dirty about how we got to where we are right now. So if somebody else wants to pick up after that.
So I guess I'll throw something in here. I'm not a small arms guy, but my background is in nuclear weapons and deterrence. So why not? This goes back to the whole red lines thing with Crimea. You mentioned that, you draw a red line, you let the other guy go over it. Therefore, you no longer have the will to carry out what everybody knows you can do. So now you have a capability and will problem. This is the next logical step of you didn't do anything before, so you can do anything about it now.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. So we've seen. Yeah, no, I'm just saying we've seen this precedent set. It's what green-lighted Saddam Hussein in 1990. And we've seen this repeat itself in Central and South America. And it's a precedent that we're well aware of, and we're very, we've talked on this show so many times about making sure we get our language right, our diplomatic language right, even with China, which still wants Taiwan, right? So that's just it. If you said it, it's an ultimatum, right? If you put a red line in the sand and say, hey, none shall pass, then you have to back that up. Otherwise, it's all just saber rattling. So, so I think that's where, clearly it wasn't saber rattling for Ukraine. Crimea fell. Crimea fell, as you said, because the vast majority of the people there were pro-Russian. And then the eastern provinces of Ukrainian were remarkably pro-Russian. And we should have come to some kind of we, meaning the global community, Russia, Ukraine, should have come to an agreement 10 years ago, and we didn't. So in that case, what we're doing is we have a prolonged conflict that's taking countless lives, and now it just looks like it's going to heat up further. And so when is enough enough? And who says enough enough? That's the other part. I'll say, when is enough enough? But also, I'm not overly confident in NATO's ability to handle this. I'm sorry, I'm going to call a duck a duck. We saw what happened in Kosovo and Bosnia. We saw 4 years of white tanks and blue helmets, and literally saw the British and the Dutch get essentially arrested and chained to bridges so that NATO wouldn't bomb the bridges, so that the Serb forces could have their way. And that was a tiny little, the Serbian military at the time was just a flea, okay? It was nowhere near the magnitude of what we're talking about in Ukraine or Russia, right? So if NATO couldn't handle a tiny little, kitchen fire in their own backyard, how are they going to handle something this large? So when is enough enough, and who the hell is responsible?
Yeah, that's a good point, Doc. And honestly, I I really hope this doesn't escalate into something greater. I mean, we've seen Russians mass on that border before, and my understanding is they're saying it's troop exercises and stuff. And let's be honest, not just the United States, but NATO as well does the same thing. Like we hold mass exercises in Poland, right there on the Russian, I almost said Soviets, the Russians' doorstep. And it's clear that stuff is a deterrent for the Russians. Now, again, I will say this again. I think we should be trying to work harder with the Russians to be allies, not enemies, not trying to revert back to the Cold War, because we've got a bigger threat on our hands, in my opinion, and that's China. And I think we should work harder with the Russians to mend those wounds. But that's my 2 cents. So I gratefully hope that these things don't escalate into an invasion like we saw in Crimea and what we saw in, I think it was 2008 with Georgia.
Yeah, and Chad, you might be able to correct me on this, but one of the reasons Putin was able to walk into the Ukraine was the Ukrainians had let their armed forces lag. They weren't keeping up with their modernization cycles. A lot of their stuff was old. They weren't training. So they were not in a position to stop the Russians regardless. And, and it seemed like in a lot of cases, the Ukrainians decided discretion was the better part of valor and just got out of the way.
That's very true. I would say that, though, the Ukrainian military, from what I've seen, has made some long strides since 2014. I mean, they've got drones now. They're employing private militias. I find it hard to believe that 92,000 Russian troops were able to occupy Ukraine successfully since some of these strides that the Ukrainian military has actually made.
I think
I was going to say, at this point, aren't we giving them some kind of training aid? Like our pilots are over there teaching their Air Force ACI and all that stuff?
Everything. We've been giving them javelin missiles, anti-tank weapons, training. I know the Brits are really heavy in training. I think even the Canadians have been out there, kind of like doing what we were doing in Afghanistan, training up the ANA.
Well, I have no doubt that the Ukrainians have fought and can fight hard. They are a serious force in terms of their determination to try to stop the Russians. I don't think that they have the equipment or the numbers. And my biggest concern is, they have modernized quite a bit over the last 10 years, and they have westernized quite a bit with their equipment, like Brent and Chad both said. I don't know if it's enough. When there becomes a rout, it doesn't matter what equipment you have. I think we've all seen that before. If you don't have the manpower to actually step in and stop a force, well, you don't have it. I think that also, from the Russian side, Putin just takes advantage when he can take advantage. I don't blame him for that. Any good dictator would. He took advantage of Crimea when Obama was president, and we didn't do anything. And we ended up with a stalemate. Donbass was hard fought over for sure. And he's amassing troops now. And I think that he knows that if he plans on making a move to move farther into Ukraine, he should do it within the next couple of years for sure. Chances are, the way things are going, we'll probably get a more conservative, more pro-military president next. And if that happens, that's another 4 years that he's kind of stuck in the sand, not able to move on a dream he has of taking more of Ukraine. I don't know whether he'll do that or not. This could be just like others have said, saber rattling, but it may very well not be. And I think that the threat is that he could push the button at any time and move forward. And I don't know that we'll do anything to stop him. I don't know that the president wants to get involved in another war. And I can tell you with certainty, if the U.S. doesn't lead the war from the front, NATO ain't going to do jack They never have, and they're not going to this time either.
Yeah. So, okay, let's put that in context. Let's put that in some context, like put in terms of time and size and magnitude. When Serbia and Kosovo took place, NATO was immediately post Cold War, right? The wall had just come down, just a handful of years, fingerful of years. Anyway, prior to. So what I'm saying is you had these ginormous NATO militaries that were trained to fight the good fight through the, through the Fulda Gap. And today, that is certainly not the case. What few NATO forces saw combat were relegated to, other than just a few mentionables, they were relegated to convoy ops and post security. It was counterinsurgency. They've cut the living crap out of their military. Look, our military got cut too. Got cut huge during the global war on terror, but it was in certain areas. Let me give you one space. All right. One space is air defense. Since the Taliban and Al Qaeda and, ISIS didn't have much in the way of jet fighters, air defense was just massively cut. And now that we look at peer militaries, we go, oh, whoa. We can't cover down on our areas of responsibility. Right. That's not how NATO took it. NATO went whole hog, as in the UK got rid of their tanks. Can you imagine? Can you imagine sitting there saying, well, everybody does convoy security, so surely that's the way the world's going to fight its wars from now on out. No one's going to think about nukes or those battleships or aircraft carriers or anything else. All right, littoral ships. I meant in the big word battleships. Anyway, the point is that that they just actually gutted their military. And we all gutted training. If it isn't counterinsurgency, we weren't doing it. So that was then. And if Serbia, the example I gave in Kosovo, Serbia was a flea, then Georgia was a pit viper, but it got rolled over pretty damn quick when you call in main battle tanks. Now, Ukraine puts them both to shame. Ukraine is a tiger, and it can bite Russia square in the ass. And I do worry about that buildup because, as Brent said, sure, we all do this. It's saber rattling. It's actually called a show of force. So it's intentionally done. We're going to put on these great big war games. We did this in the Cold War all the time. Reforger, Team Spirit, the list goes on. Prairie Warrior, all of these things. And so we did this to show that we had the resolve and the capability to reinforce anywhere in the world. And if that's all that Russia's doing, fine. But look, we thought that in Georgia too, and they came across that border. In fact, they didn't just come across a border. If you know anything about the Georgia conflict, they came in by sea too. They did an amphibious landing, and it was a pincer movement. And Georgia fell, like in a week, 10 days? It was ridiculous. So I am saying, right, kind of just giving like the magnitude of, okay, maybe this is all just a show of force, but if it's not, who the hell could respond?
So I kind of think we're kind of at a stalemate problem, though, because who else is going to respond capable besides us or maybe a China? And then this goes back to, you mentioned the Cold War, Korea, of do we really want to trade Seoul for New York at the time? So the answer was probably not. So are we going to trade Kiev for New York or DC? We don't know. And no one's going to toe to toe with that. Like, I don't think we want to get involved direct toe to toe, which is not what we want to do. So I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Yeah, 100%. I don't see American people wanting the U.S. to go to war with Russia over Ukraine at all. And I could see the U.S. not intervening, at least with actual boots on the ground whatsoever in Ukraine, if that ever were to take place. Now, with that said, I could see us providing other means of support, weapon systems, training from the outside, maybe drones or anti-drone technology and stuff, because I mean, what we're seeing right now is a heavy use of drones. What conflict was that recently where one side was outfitted with Turkish drones and the other side just got annihilated. They had no defense against it. So I can see us intervening in that regards, helping out their Ukrainians. I'm sure we're already doing that already with electronic countermeasures and stuff like that, trying to help the Ukrainians in that regards. But one thing I want to mention or piggyback off of what Doc was saying about Georgia getting steamrolled. Look at the pictures of the Russian military during that invasion, right? They almost look like the same military that they were during the Soviet Union. Look at them now. Uniformity across the board in, utilities, body armor, helmets, weapons. Back in when they invaded Georgia, a lot of them were still wearing old Soviet era steel pots. Now those guys, outfitted Kevlar head to toe, they look like they're NATO troops. They have PECs, they have MVGs. It's a completely different military now, one that's completely been revamped. So much more efficient. If they took Georgia in a matter of days, hey, get ready. That's a very professional organization. At least they've come a long way since then.
I think a lot of that is because initially Russia denied it was Russia. Now everybody knew it was Russia. It was a bit of a joke, but it was cute to see the tricks that they tried to pull. They denied that they were involved, and they said, "Oh, these are some Crimeans that have formed up their own groups and have attacked on their own, and we're hands off. We don't have anything to do with it. Sure, it benefits us and us only, but those aren't our troops. Those are Crimean troops." And we found out pretty quick. We were actually through cell phone technology, we were able to track tanks, specific tank models, all the way back to military bases in Russia. Someone said, "Oh, there goes a tank going down the street. Look at that on that truck. That's cool." And then somebody else went, "Oh, look at that tank. That tank is loaded up on a train." And then all of a sudden you're in Crimea and they're going, "Oh, look, the train is unloading the tank." And it's the same tank. I mean, within a matter of days, we had put together through cell phone technology, not only cell phone technology, but through that capability alone, we were able to track not only where tanks were going, but personnel also. Here's this guy training in a camp somewhere near Moscow, and 2 weeks later, here he is walking around with an AK somewhere in Ukraine. So we put that together. That was, but the thinly veiled proxy war that Russia tried to put together, I think might have been part of the facade for that. Might have been using a lot of the older equipment, the outdated stuff, to make them look more less uniform and more like a militia or volunteer unit for that cover story initially, just to try to confuse those that may be saying, particularly maybe those in NATO that are saying, "Hey, Russia's attacking." NATO doesn't need much of an excuse to turn their back on somebody and say, "No, this isn't what my eyes are telling me it is. Must be something else." And I think that was part of the case. Now, where they are now, I think that's not the case. I mean, obviously we all know that it's Russia, and I don't know that Russia is doing a whole lot of denying it. But we've seen the same thing on the side of Ukraine also. They started out with a lot of that older equipment too that they had, a lot of that old Komblock Soviet stuff that they had. And now they look fairly modernized too for the units that they have, the large units that they have in the field.
UT, John, what you guys jump in there?
So this is kind of one of those subjects that I've had conversations with quite a few friends about, including some far smarter than me on the topic. One of them was actually intelligence in the Marine Corps when he was in, and Russia was one of his things. So my other buddy that's fairly well spooled up, they've kind of got similar but differing views on it. My one buddy is saying that he feels like what Russia's doing, and to kind of address some of the comments in the chat, Russia doesn't want all Ukraine. What Russia wants is about half of Ukraine. They want solid land all the way down to the Black Sea and Crimea. That way they've got complete land access to the Black Sea, where they've got their Black Sea fleet based out of Crimea at. So with them massing all the troops and equipment and all of that, they're starting to get into the hard part of winter over there. And What he was saying, again, I'm repeating from him, is that in that kind of winter conditions, they can't continue to have those troops and that equipment at that level massed for very long and them just sitting there. They're going to have to move and move pretty soon. They're either going to have to move forward and do something, or they're going to have to pull everything back and regroup. And they can't just keep bivouac like that. The weather is too hard on the equipment, too hard on the troops, etc. So I think there's potential there that if they're going to do it, they could do it soon. I don't think they want all of Ukraine, just part of it. The concern, though, as far as who would do what, we're pretty much feckless at this point, in my opinion, because of our leadership. But you've got Poland, Latvia, Estonia. All three of them are really wound up right now with Russia because of Belarus and what's going on there. Poland has said a long time ago that if they were to make a move on Ukraine at all, Poland wasn't having none of that because they don't want Russia 1 inch closer to them than they already are, especially if they felt like they were starting to get surrounded. So there's a really good chance that Poland, Latvia, Estonia, etc., are going to say, screw that. We're coming to help. You start getting other countries involved that we're close friends with and do a lot of cross training with, supply a lot of equipment to, etc. The water starts getting real murky and dirty. Now, the other side of that is, will Russia go soon? So my other buddy that's pretty spooled up on this conversation we were having, he thinks that you've got to tie what's going on with Russia and Ukraine in with China and Taiwan. Because China's kind of feeling some kind of way about our leadership right now, the same as Russia. They want Taiwan. That's no big secret. They've been doing a lot of squirrely things lately to indicate they're getting ready to do it. The question is when. And I think both of them are smart enough to know if Russia moved on Ukraine, China moved on Taiwan, they did it at the same time. Taking into account Poland, Latvia, Estonia, and who knows who else in Europe that may get involved, taking into account that Japan has already said, heck no, not at all. China makes a move on Taiwan, they're stepping in because they don't want China island hopping south of them. Well, we're tight friends again with Japan. So you're getting the water muddied on both sides. If they do that at the same time, flag waving as I am, are we really even economically in a position right now to handle a major two-front conflict, even if it's not direct troops, even if it's just exterior support? I don't know the answer to that. But here's the other little fly in the ointment as far as when. I don't think China, based on what my buddy is telling me, because it makes sense, is going to move on Taiwan until around March. And the reason being is because that's when the seas in the South China Sea, as far as the currents and wind, will be favorable for what they need to do to ferry everything over that they would need to do to actually take Taiwan. They've got to wait for those seas to be right. So if that's the case, then that's what they do, hypothetically. Then that puts the thing back on Russia. Okay, does Russia put everything off until March and wait until China makes a move? Or do they go ahead and do it now because they've got everything massed? They got to do something with them. They either got to commit or withdraw. Or is China waiting to see what Russia does to kind of gauge world reaction so that then they can determine what way they want to do? And if the world sits back and, oh, you shouldn't have done that, and that's it, then China goes, oh, well, we can make a move then at our leisure, and nobody's going to do anything other than say harsh words to us and send strongly worded letters, and that's it. I don't really know all the answers, but I think it's something we need to watch very close. Again, not so much from a direct military involvement, while that is possible, but these are all people that we have strong economic ties with as far as like military support, weapons and training and stuff that we send them and commit to them. There's a lot invested there. And the waters just get really murky. I think China and Russia are both smart enough to know that the waters are murky and would be stupid not to take advantage of that. So it's kind of where my head's at the moment, just kind of watching things with a very keenly interested eye. Abner, you can take it.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of you guys. I'll be honest, I haven't been keeping track of what's going on there. I do know that they are amassing on the border at the north and the east side, and that's pretty obvious what they're going to do, pincer move, right, if they do decide to move in. And John, yeah, I agree. Like China, yeah, they're waiting, because it's strategically, they know the U.S. can respond, but if you attack on two fronts, right, it's going to make it much more difficult. So yeah, I agree there. I do remember watching something about Russia and one of their oil pipelines that they were building along the north, and it got stopped, and they weren't happy with that. So I don't remember the information correctly. It's kind of vague, but they got stopped and they couldn't get their oil. So moving down that direction toward the Ukraine, like you said, it makes sense. They can't go up there to get oil. There's probably oil down there in the Ukraine, the Black Sea, all that kind of stuff. More access, more land. It's all geopolitical, and most of the time it is over oil resources. So, yeah.
I want to say too, like Putin is regardless what you feel about him, he's a strong leader. I mean, that dude, he's been in power for how many years? That guy, he's on point. He's on point. He's played many of our presidents as essentially their bitch, and has steeled our national leaders. It's been mind-boggling how he's gotten his way. He's done what he's wanted to do. When they invaded Georgia, Georgia had troops in Iraq at that time. They were helping us, fighting alongside us in Iraq when the Russians invaded that country. I remember the Jordans having to get pulled out and sent back over there. So like Putin didn't give a shit on what we want or what our country wanted or what our presidents wanted at the time. So that gives you guys right there. And he's former KGB. Like this guy is a smart son of a bitch, and I'll admit he's a good leader for them.
I wish our leadership was that strong. Underestimate him at your own peril. You might not like man what he does, but you darn well better respect his capability and how he's thinking and what he's doing. That's you're stupid if you think he's just some Russian chump. It's far from that.
There's no wokeness in Putin's cabinet. I can assure you of that. If you show weakness, he will humiliate you and take advantage. And I believe that's exactly what a good leader should do. I'm not saying that he's the right fit for our country, but there are certainly some properties within his leadership that we see him riding a bear without a shirt, and we're going, man, why can't our president do that?
You could think of this in terms of that whole cycle around good times, weak people. Well, fall of the Soviet Union left weak people, so now you got strong people who had to pull out of it, and that's what we're facing.
Yeah, we got our president wearing freaking five masks on conference calls on national television. And meanwhile, Putin's riding fucking horses bareback, shooting AK-47s from the hip and stuff.
I guarantee you he ain't wearing Depends.
Just saying, right, John?
Not like ours is.
Well, all right. So let me pine in here again and to say that we are, first off, we're looking at different cultures, right? And that's always going to be a difficult thing to parse because we tend to talk about it as China, the Russians, and Ukraine, and even America as if we're this monolithic being, and we aren't. So take what I'm going to say next with a healthy dose of salt. But I will say that whereas China historically seems to understand the escalation of conflict, that is, it looks very positional. It's saying, okay, where do I apply, force, be it diplomacy, information, military, or economics, dime? Where do I apply that? And it looks for that escalation, much much as we do, or at least we purport to do. Whereas historically, I don't mean in the last 100 years, I mean in the last 800 years, Russia has the axe theory, and it sees America's tendency to escalate and says, hey, you know, I mean, we have the own saying. We have a saying that says, what is the saying? Your pistol is only to fight your way back to the long rifle you never should have put down in the first place. I think that's the old axiom. And Russia doesn't understand this. Their axe theory says this. Guy walks into the bar, he's got an axe and he's got a knife. He gets into the fight, he wields the axe first. It's only after he can no longer use the axe that he resorts to his knife. So this is the axe theory. And again, if you look at that, that perspective, then it does make the gathering on Ukraine, the issues in Ukraine, the sideshow of Belarus. You look at all that and you think, wow, is this coming down again? Because they already took Crimea, and they certainly, like I said, they certainly went into Chechnya. They certainly went into Georgia without haste. So when they make a decision, they're going to come, and they're going to come strong. They're not. Chances are, unless they think that they can get away with it, they're not going to ease their way into the pool. They're going to cannonball. You know, China, maybe not so much. So I think that's one thing that needs to be said. And the other thing I want to say about that is that even if we use diplomacy to solve this, because China is that way. So let's say, you know, we pull a Hail Mary pass, we get Russia to say, okay, look, we just want this land part of this easternmost provinces of Ukraine so that we have a land bridge to Crimea and it's secure. And the rest of Ukraine is Ukrainian. We recognize that. We pull out all fighters, blah, 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 blah. Everybody's high-fiving everybody, saying, wow, diplomatic solution. We did this without blood. I guarantee you China's going, really? They play a long game.
What you got, Chad? You've been quiet for a while. You're muted, bud.
Sorry. I think Russia, if they did go into Ukraine, would probably be provoking the EU quite a bit. I know, you know, we're all military guys. We think in terms of military use of force, things like that. But there's an economic side to this. And the sanctions that Russia was slapped with in 2014 were pretty harsh. And a lot of that came from the EU. I mean, when you got Germany talking trash towards Russia, I mean, that says quite a bit. So I think Russia is engaged right now in a lot of asymmetric campaigns, disinformation, propaganda. I think they're relying on these Russian dissidents in Ukraine to kind of fight the war for them. I do think this is saber rattling. I think Russia would be better off trying to win without firing a shot. But I do think that there is an economic side to this that you know we haven't really discussed, and I think that you know, because Ukraine is looking at joining the EU. I think they're putting an application in 2024, and they'll probably be a member of the EU within 10 years. So the EU has a lot of interest in there. They're one of the bigger trading partners with Russia. A lot of these former Soviet bloc countries like Latvia, Estonia, Poland, they're all part of the EU now. So I think there's some connection there with all these former Soviet bloc nations that kind of want to stick together. So
one would hope.
What you got, Les?
You know, I agree with a lot of what's being said here. The Russians are just doing what they know they can get away with. They've probably rightly surmised we're not going to do much. You know, it took till Trump took office to start pumping the javelins and some of the other higher end military equipment to the Ukrainians. And I'm betting Vlad thinks he can put a little pressure on now, but Biden won't do anything more than what's been done. And he can probably go grab something while the grabbing's good. And the Ukraine is low-hanging fruit. He's not going to go after the Finns. He's not going to go after the Estonians. because in some respects, while they have less military force, he'd have full-blown insurgencies on his hands in both those places. So in a lot of ways, Ukraine's low-hanging fruit. He's going to go for it.
Let's not forget either that Burisma is a Ukrainian company. So, Biden might have some investment there, 10% for the big guy. So if the Russians invade Ukraine, it might cut into his own personal earnings. And hey, you got the U.S. military at your disposal.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Brand. I mean, we certainly have interest over there, and I do think, I mean, if this thing were to unfold, I think if we saw them push forward at all, I agree with what others have said, John, that they probably only want another smaller portion of Ukraine, not the entire country. I actually completely agree with that. I can see that being the next step for them, first of all. And then secondly, I think that if he did push forward, he's going to look at what the new capabilities Ukraine has being our capabilities. One, we're obviously providing them with drone support. And I've seen through video drones being used to spot artillery. It's great. You fly a drone over an area, you see a platoon of men gathering in that area, and then you shell it with artillery, and you can in real time watch that artillery hit. You can adjust that fire if you need to. And if you get good hits, then you can confirm that you've gotten good hits. Artillery, still king of the battlefield. That hasn't changed in 100 years. I don't know if it's ever going to change. Artillery is absolutely devastating. Secondly, I'm sure we'll give them satellite imagery, which is going to be just as good. We can do the same thing with satellite imagery on a larger level than what we do with drones on a small level. And with the javelins and the other training that we're giving them, we're probably over there training them on their tanks, even though it's Soviet armor. I'm sure that we can train them up, get them spooled up on that. A lot of their techniques are starting to look more and more Western. Their uniforms are multicam. Their armor looks more Western. It looks like they're wearing Kevlars. I'm sure it's a Ukrainian equivalent, but nonetheless, they are turning into a very Western looking military in a lot of ways. And I'm sure that they're getting the support from us and maybe some other countries to be able to do that. Not saying we'll ever put boots on the ground. That's not where I'm going with this. But if we're giving them some type of air support, satellite support, missile support, artillery support, even through just the form of advisors, that could prove very, very effective. We know that you start moving tanks on the ground. Tanks really haven't changed much since World War II in terms of the ability to take them out using things like javelins. A javelin will take out any tank on the field today, if I'm not mistaken. And I expect that, all of a sudden you push forward with 5 tanks and you think you're Johnny Badass, and then in an hour, you're 5 tanks short because a few guys had javelins that are a fraction of the cost of that tank. And it's 1 or 2 guys running a javelin and 5 or 6 guys crewing a tank. That becomes very costly very fast.
Bueller?
Doc, do you care to reply, Doc? I see the wheels in your head spinning.
Yeah, for me, I don't have a satisfying answer as to, number one, what the Russians want. And it's easy to say, well, they want a direct road to Crimea. Then ask for that. And they haven't asked for that. And they took Crimea. They had the gumption to just walk in and take something that clearly wasn't theirs. So they're not showing the hand, and I don't know exactly what they want. I know that America doesn't want any war. We certainly don't want a war with the Russian people. I don't trust NATO to go to war for Ukraine. I don't trust NATO to go to war for NATO. All right. Now, Eastern European countries, whether they're actually a member or a partial member or a 1/16th member of NATO, who gives a rat's ass? The Eastern European countries have more at stake. I can see Hungary. I can see Poland pulling together with Ukraine. And that would give it would not only just give some a larger hitting power, but it would also, it would potentially hold Russia at bay. I'm saying just geographically, it could hold Russia at bay. And of course, it would win the favor of both NATO and the Americans. So I really don't know what Russia wants. And I'm reticent to offer a solution when I Like I said, I don't know what's negotiated. Even if they said that, even if they said, look, we just want this highway. We want this 100 miles of highway. All right, we're inclined to say, yeah, it's not worth dying over that. Well, people have already been dying over that. And who are we to say what is right for Ukraine or right for Russia? Yet at the same time, this live stream has discussed, our need to defend Taiwan over and over and over again from China. I'm not sure one act of aggression has more merit or less merit than the other. And so, like I said, this is a very fuzzy thing for me, and I fear the American people won't have the resolve to do what they need to do when they need to do it. I'm willing to point a lot of criticism at NATO, but let's be honest, I could point almost the exact same criticism at America.
That's fair. That's a fair point. Yeah. I think there's more at stake with the whole Taiwan thing. I mean, if Taiwan falls, I mean, Taiwan's been a long ally of ours, ever since, China fell, or the nationalist Chinese anyways. So I think there's long historical ties there in that regards. And then if Taiwan falls, the Chicoms essentially have control of the whole South China Sea. So we have a lot invested there, I think, more so than the whole Ukraine thing, which is, hasn't been going on all that long. Again, I don't think the U.S. will intervene in a Ukrainian-Russian conflict. They haven't really since this thing has kicked off. And I just watched special the other day, and it's kind of talking about the current situation, and it's right now it's kind of like a silent war where they're shooting at each other every day, but you don't hear about it. But what really struck me is, and I brought this up the other day when we were talking about cold weather warfare, is they were interviewing these Ukrainian troops, and the Russians are, they have state of the art, electronic warfare, and they're jamming Ukrainian radios and everything else. So the Ukrainian troops that are on the front are essentially communicating via field phone, like landlines and stuff, because their radio equipment's not working because of all the jamming that's going on by the Russians. So if anything, I'm sure we already are, but we need to be taking notes. We need to be testing our new equipment there in Ukraine, whether that's having a CIA operative on the ground with the Ukrainians, with our latest and greatest gizmo, using it against the Russian separatist over there or whatever. But we need to be testing our latest, greatest stuff against the Russians, because the Russians are employing their latest and greatest against the Ukrainians and presumably us as well. They're doing it in Syria. Obviously, they're doing it in Ukraine. So we need to be doing this just like the Cold War to better our own selves for, God forbid a fight against Russia, which I hope doesn't happen, but a more likely fight against the Chicoms, because we already know that the Chicoms are ahead of the hypersonic missiles, and who knows what else.
Well, let me back off from what I just said. I don't think Americans have the resolve. I don't think we want this fight. I don't think we belong in this fight. Hey, guys, Duke Ferdinand was shot in Serbia and, in 1914, and we didn't have squat to do with that. We were sucked into that war. We were sucked into one war after another. We shouldn't have even been in Vietnam, but we were pulled into that for 8-9 long years. So, we've already discussed this, where if Poland and Hungary come to the aid, and Finland for that matter, come to the aid of Ukraine. If China makes a play on Taiwan and Korea and Japan come to the aid of Taiwan, guess what? We not only have a global war, we're pulled into both theaters. I don't think we can sit that one out. And I think Japan, Korea, Hungary, and Poland know this as much as Taiwan and Ukraine. So I don't like, again, very uncomfortable not being in control of this. It seems like we aren't the primary player. We're waiting to see what happens. I think maybe we need to take a more proactive, at least diplomatic role.
Well, here's a thought too that I keep bouncing around, and I don't have an answer to it, but it keeps brewing in my head from some things that some other folks, again, smarter than me, have said. China's really got a lot more aggressive posture towards us right now than Russia does. And as Brent said, There's stuff that the Chinese got that concern me a lot more than what Russia has. Not that they're not a peer foe, they absolutely are. But if China decided to mimic Japan's World War II strategy, the thing that they would want to do that keeps them from being any kind of a real physical threat to us continentally right now is the Pacific Ocean. They took Taiwan and then started doing their own little repeat island hopping campaign. The next thing you know, they're well close enough to the west coast of America for that big Pacific Ocean to suddenly not be such a problem for them anymore, for them to say, hey, we can touch you now. Not saying they would or wouldn't, just saying they could be in a position to say that. Now, would they do that? I have no idea. I'm just saying, I've only heard a couple of people mention that, and when it first got mentioned to me, the light bulb kind of went off and goes, that wouldn't be an actually bad strategy for China. I mean, it would put them, the closer they can get to Hawaii, the better, because then that puts them that much closer to the west coast of the U.S. Again, I don't know if they would do it or not, but just throwing it out there as food for thought.
Yeah, when I think of all of what Russia is doing and China, a coworker and I were talking about it. We were talking mostly about China and how they are the bigger threat. America's playing checkers, right? I use this analogy with him. We're playing checkers, the Russians playing chess, and China is playing Go. Now, if you guys don't know what the game of Go is, it's a board game, a whole bunch of white rocks and black rocks, and the strategy is to enclose on all your opponent's stones. You enclose everything. You basically lock them in where they can't do anything. And that's what China's playing. They're playing the game of Go. Russia's playing chess, and we're playing checkers. And it's putting us in a real bad situation.
I would agree with that.
I think maybe one thing, and I'm going to pass this to any of you guys that want it, but one thing to keep in mind, it's always in the back of my mind, is Russia's economy. I'm not as concerned with China's economy. I think that they have the manpower and the ability, in particular, some have mentioned in the chat too, the trade with us, that we're somewhat dependent on one another. But Russia, on the other hand, we don't do a whole lot of trading with Russia. Russia's economy, I believe, is about the size of that of Texas. Not that that's necessarily a small economy, but it's certainly nothing compared to what the United States has, and compared to what the United States and Europe has. Running a war that's prolonged at all is extremely expensive. And I know that some of those in the chat have talked about some of these, new wonder weapons that the Russians have. They've only got a few of those, and they got to fuel those. They got to build those. They got to maintain those. I don't particularly see them burning those up on the front lines of Ukraine. It doesn't seem like they're doing that at all. They're being they're being very well thought out when they move forward with their troops. They're throwing a lot of older, outdated equipment that can be burned up, BMPs, T-72s, but I'm not seeing any top of the line Russian equipment being lost in Ukraine. And I don't know that I expect to see that if they move forward either. I think that their plan, because it's so expensive to develop, and it would be costly to lose. I'm not sure that we're going to see a lot of those on the front lines if they decide to take over another part of Ukraine. Here's a question for you guys, particularly Doc. I know you're probably spun up on the economics of Russia. Chad, maybe you too can speak to that. And also for the buildup that we've been seeing, obviously we've been seeing building. Are we seeing top of the line tanks right off the factory floor out there, or is this older, outdated equipment?
Go ahead, Doc.
That's sad when everybody knows I'm, my eager face. He wants to talk. All right.
You do not want to talk, Doc.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Fair enough. Look, China is the larger economic power, and when I say that, I mean that they are more aggressive. They're more aggressive in their investing globally. And they are also more into disruption, cyber disruption, all right, cyber attacks, cyber espionage. They're far more. And so in regards to that, I see them as maybe the longer term threat. But America, is pacing ourselves against China. So I didn't even know what that word meant till very recently. I kept hearing it in the news. We're pacing, Pentagon saying, well, we're pacing China. And I didn't know what that meant. And they said, well, pacing is like this. When you're in a race, you find the fastest runner and you want to outrun that person, but you match them. You come up to speed and match them until you're ready to make your move. So this is the term pacing. And it's interesting to me that they said China was pacing, because while I see them as the greater economic threat, and I believe that has the longevity, that's the longer arm of all of your dime, diplomacy, information, military, and economics. While that is the longer threat, I do see China being far more innovative than Russia. Russia doesn't, seems stagnant by comparison. But this is also a bit of a misnomer, because Russia is so much more capable as a military force than China. Always has been. In the last 100 years anyway, it has been the far more capable of the two. And so while the growth in China, I can see that argument, wow, look at this military growth, we should pace with that. I think the larger threat has always been Russia, if we're looking purely from military a standpoint or a perspective. So I don't know. I'm Bruce. That is not to discount your question about economics. I think you're right, that we need to consider that. But I'm also a bit dismayed that we've elected to pace ourselves with China, and I don't know if that is again because of their work in electronic espionage, or if it's because they're just so innovative at this point, they're willing to take risk with their design of military hardware technologies, things like that. I don't know. Again, I'll let other people weigh in.
Hey, fellas, we got out less than 3 mics before we hit 1 hour. So I think it's start wrapping this portion of the topic up so that we can move on to the next one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go around the horn. I'll go last. So I'm going to kick it over to John. Just final thoughts. What do you think the U.S. do in response to this? All right, John, you got the con, brother.
Right now, honestly, there's not a whole lot we can do, just due to the reason and the situation we've put ourselves in, both militarily, diplomatically, economically, etc. All we can really do is watch and wait. I mean, we've put ourselves in a position where we almost have to be reactive. We can't really be as proactive as maybe we should, if we should at all. I don't know. I don't really have any good answers, but the bigger things that really concern me is not so much direct military involvement, which of course that is a concern, but it's the economic side. We wouldn't have to trade a single shot with either of those countries, but the rest of the world gets embroiled in stuff. It could affect us seriously on an economic level that I don't think people are giving enough weight to. And even if we did get in a direct involvement with China, everybody keeps saying, oh, well, China's dependent on our economy. You know what? You're thinking like a first world American. China doesn't care. Half their country lives in mud huts still. They wouldn't know if they had an economic collapse. If they lost a couple of 100 million people, China would be better off for it because they'd have a lower population. China can rebuild economically based off of just sheer communist slave labor. We couldn't. It's going to be very disconcerting to try to explain to your kids why we're living in cardboard boxes on the street. Oh, well, China's suffering too. Doesn't that make you feel better? Because they're really not. But anyway, watch the economic stuff. The Dow just took a plummet Friday simply off of one little thing about something I'm sure y'all seen that I ain't going to say out loud, but it's fragile. Our economy is very fragile right now.
Well, I'd say now is the time for the United States to live up to its historic role as the arsenal of democracy. And what we should be doing is pumping military aid into the Eastern European nations, Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and use that for them to modernize. And then they can pump their old Soviet era stuff that they are still using over to the Ukrainians. Because when you think about it, the Russians aren't putting their top of the line stuff into the Ukraine fight. And 5,000 tanks is 5,000 tanks. Doesn't matter what kind they are. And I think if we do that, plus up our Eastern NATO allies, one, that gets the Russians' attention and diverts their resources away from the Ukrainians. Two, it frees up some older equipment that, quite frankly, the Ukrainians are logistically able to support better. And third, it forces the rest of NATO to kind of stand too, which is something they're kind of not doing.
Yeah, I agree with you guys who've spoke before me. I really think America, when it comes to the Russia thing, we should be supporting those countries there, not heavily putting a lot of our equipment and men over there. Again, just supporting them, training them up, and just getting them ready for anything bad. As for China, you got to go the diplomatic route. Again, they're playing the game of Go. We're playing checkers. We have to play that game, the same game they're playing. If not, we're always going to get the bad end of the deal there when it comes to China. If China starts taking islands over there, right, it's just going to fold real fast because Japan, even though Japan's got a strong military against China, just sheer numbers, it's going to be bad. The Philippines, I'm going to tell you right now, they're still a third world country. I'm from there. It's still third world. Indonesia, Malaysia, still, they're third world countries. Some of their cities are modern, but overall, that part of the world is still third world country. And China, being the superpower on that region, can easily just go in and take territory. So taking China to the diplomatic table is probably the best route. And again, if we get in a conflict there, military conflict, it may trigger Russia to go ahead and move in on Ukraine, and then again that creates two fronts, making it much more difficult for us to deal with the world situation.
Oh, now I got to think of something different to say. So, I don't know. From my perspective, I agree with a lot of what's been said so far. I don't think we're really willing or should go step toe to toe with anybody at this point. We've got too many of our own problems we have to solve first. I see some comments running about how our economy, well, I thought it was great. It's not. It hasn't been for a while. We've been faking it, but luckily the rest of the world has too. So I think we need to be focusing on rebuilding what made us such a great deterrent before, and then to follow what Pegasus test said, building up our capability to supply the rest of the world to also take care of business as well.
Okay. So let's go back to the beginning of the last World War, right? And Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, who promised peace in our time and went and did a secret negotiation deal with Adolf Hitler and came back waving a piece of paper that had no more value than toilet paper pre-COVID. Anyway, so I think the other thing to remember about that is we often associate Chamberlain as he was one of the Labor parties, liberal parties, something like this. That's not true at all. He was a conservative. And I mention that because I think conservatives rightfully say, hey, you do you and I'll do me and let's all just get along. And, and so maybe appeasement is part of our nature, and I'm not even asking anyone to apologize for that. I am just wanting to say, let's recognize that as conservatives, as Americans, we tend to be reluctant to go to war. And that's a real irony when you look at how many times we go to war, but we are reluctant. So you have to ask yourself, what the hell was going on? Could we, it's a great, thinking exercise. Could we have stopped World War II had we gone to war early and ignored Chamberlain and did all these other things? In the end, no. No, we were protected by two big bodies of water and time. And I would say that, we need to be wise about this. We need to keep our eye on this. We need to diffuse it where we can. I don't mean appeasement, but I do mean diffuse it where we can. And if we cannot, well, then we do what we did in the past two world wars. We become the arsenal of democracy. Not just weapons, not just technology and information, but advisors, right? And we build up the countries that we've, the aforementioned nations and peoples. I think we have to be willing to play that role and be prepared to step in if that's the unfortunate way that the winds blow, because I don't think there's a way out of this proactively right now. I think we're going to have to sit and watch.
As far as what should America do, that's, I wish I had the answer. That's really hard to answer right at this time. I do think that Ukraine has come a long way since 2014. I think they've built their military, and I think that Russia would be making a huge mistake to invade. I don't think 90,000, 92,000 troops, was last I heard, is enough to occupy that country. I think Ukraine, there's enough nationalist sentiment in Ukraine, at least from the news reports that I've seen, where they would have a complete mess on their hands. It would be a total war on the side of, from the Ukraine standpoint, against Russian invaders. So I wouldn't underestimate Ukraine in this at all. I think they've come a long way. On a side note, if any of you want a good book to read, I've been reading Putin's Russia, 7th edition. It's some good insights on Putin as a leader. I know a couple of y'all have talked about him as a leader, but it's a good read. I would definitely recommend it.
All right. So the question is, what should we do in Ukraine, or what will we do in Ukraine? Those are those give us two very different answers, don't they? We've talked about this quite a bit, but I'm a child of the '80s. I'm always looking for a good scrap with the bear. That's just the way it was. We just all grew up thinking we were going to fight Russia and the paratroopers landing over the football fields. As I've said before, that never really materialized. But I do think that what I would like to see, and we're probably not going to see it, but what I would like to see is, let's take all those tanks that the Marines are no longer using, and let's put those in the hands of the Ukrainians. Let's get them some training on how to use them. Let's turn the Ukrainian military into one that is disproportionately strong for the size of country that they are in, that are absolutely capable of delivering a serious, real strike and stop against a much larger, much better equipped country like Russia. So when they do thrust in, they are immediately slapped back, and they have to sit back and think about whether they really want to deal with this war that they've got on their hands or not. I think that Ukraine's people are nationalist enough, as others have said, that they have sacrificed up until this point, and they will continue to sacrifice lives as long as they feel that they have a chance at winning that fight. And the only way that they can do that is if they have the equipment and the training to be able to do so. A couple of good victories for the Ukrainians, stopping the Russian bear, that would work wonders for morale, and may very well make the people of Russia ask Putin, what are we doing in this country, much like they did in Afghanistan. That's my 2 cents worth.
All right, my final piece before we segue into our next topic. So personally, I don't believe the Russians are going to invade. I think it's just a build up, just to show force, like like the U.S. does, like NATO does. Russians do it too. The Chi-Coms do it too. That's my personal belief. However, I think we should take the the Ronald Reagan approach, and I've said this multiple times, better relations with the Russians. I believe that us being strong against the Russians will lead to better relations with the Russians. I know that sounds crazy, but as long as Putin believes he has the upper hand, and right now I think he does. I think he views our current president as weak. I believe he views that he has the upper hand on everything and he can do whatever he needs to do. And why? There's precedence for that. Look how he handled Syria. Look how he handled Georgia. He's been able to get and achieve his strategic goals every time. So my opinion is we need to put up a strong front. Like Bruce says, we need to arm Ukrainians. We need to be testing out our latest and greatest technology in the Ukraine, not necessarily having American boots on the ground, but hey, if we have new electronic countermeasures and stuff, we need to be testing them against the Russian stuff, because you can almost rest assured that the capabilities that the Russians have mirror that of the capabilities that the Chi-Coms have. So peace through strength, and our strategy should be our plan is that we win. All right. Regardless, we win, and we win through peace, through strength. We put the equipment there, we put the training in place, and I think that will help us in the long run. So anyways, let's segue into our next conversation, guys. I think this was a good talk. Man, we've had like 400 plus viewers in here the whole time, so that's pretty impressive. Our next topic we're going to talk about is, do American troops have the know-how, and do they know the capabilities and limitations of foreign weapon systems, specifically enemy weapon systems? And that could be anything from small arms such as AK platforms all the way up to mortars, to artillery, and everything. We have the tendency, and not just American troops, but NATO troops as well, but we have the tendency of thinking that our stuff is always the best, right? And that has just not been the case. As far back as, I'm thinking U.S. conflicts here, you can go Korea or Vietnam. The Soviet artillery had, longer range capabilities than our own. And we always have we always think that our stuff is the best. Our stuff reaches the furthest. And it's not always necessarily true, or that we have the best service rifle. I mean, technology has come a long way. So are American troops sufficiently trained on foreign platforms? I would argue that they're not. I could go into an infantry rifle company today and put down a standard AKM, something that's been around, for many decades now, and say, hey, Marine or soldier, I want you to disassemble this weapon and reassemble it. And I would guarantee you that 80 to 90% of them could not do it. And that bothers me. I'm wearing a shirt here, FWIC. If you guys don't know what FWIC is, that's Foreign Weapons Instructor Course. That is a Marine Corps school in Quantico. I was fortunate enough to attend that. That was an excellent school. And when I went there, we had a small classroom. And this was the only FWIC taught in the Marine Corps. Very small classroom. So a very, very small number of Marines were going through that course. And, that just goes to show you that we just don't have the institution in place that should be teaching these things, because I think it's very important. So I'm going to open it up to the floor so that you guys can discuss this conversation.
All right, I'll jump on the grenade and get it started. It depends which weapon system you're talking about, which is better. I can say from my recent experiences of traveling to Finland and working with a lot of Finnish reservists, they have the RK-62 and 92 series rifles, which are considered the best of the AK, kind of the pinnacle of design. And yet they all have ARs. They all shoot ARs. They compete with ARs, and they'll all tell you to a man that their ARs are better than their AKs. So in that respect, I do think we have the best rifle. We have the best rifle through evolution. The modern M4 variant of the AR M16 series is a long way from what it started out in 1959. In that case, yes, we do have the best weapons. Do we have the best artillery? I can't answer that because I'm not up on the modern 777 gun and its capabilities. I can tell you over in Desert Storm that the South African G5 cannons the Iraqis had very much outranged our M1908s and made for a very crappy long night of artillery bombardment that we could do nothing about. Are our tanks better? Hell yes, hands down. But as I said earlier, 5,000 tanks beats nothing when you don't have any. And I can tell you, when we first got in the first stages of Desert Shield, early August 1990, we got on the ground there, and all the tanks were still out on the water because the amphibs hadn't showed up, MPS hadn't showed up, and those 5,000 T-55s that Saddam had were damn scary because we had nothing to stop them, because even a T-55 is impervious to an M16 bullet. So I think it depends on time, and I think it depends on the specific weapon system about who's got better. Also, it all depends on what doctrine is and how those weapon systems are employed. So you may have artillery that can outrange your enemies, but if you don't employ your artillery correctly, it's kind of a moot point.
So I'll get a different angle on this one, because I will readily admit I am not the small arms expert nor infantry tactics person in the room. So I'll go from the doctrine standpoint, though, because I think that's a really good point. In that, me coming from the Air Force, you go back to World War I, we learned basic spare power. World War II, we deleted everything. And then it's like, oh, well, crap, we got to build it up again. And then you got to keep learning from the last war over and over and over again. And I think we're at a point right now where everybody here sees it, that we spent 20 years doing very particular style of fighting, where there wasn't a whole lot of foot-mounted patrols, a lot of mounted mechanized stuff. And hey, if you had a problem, call in an airstrike, because the airspace is uncontested. So what the hell, why not? I think we had a pretty steep learning curve in front of us, no matter what, and hardware independent of that.
That's a good point. I think when we look at equipment like this, I didn't realize how broad this topic was going to be until I heard Brent kind of lay it out. So I'll kind of break this into two parts. Small arms, things short of mortars. I think that I completely agree with what Brent says, that most American troops don't know their way around those weapons, whether they're MG3s, PKMs, AKs, any of the small arms. There's too many to list, but any of the small arms that are out there. However, I think that with a week's training on a primitive range, I could make anyone proficient with one of those. And if I can do it, then I know that our military instructors that have been to foreign weapons instructor course, like Brent has been, no problem. If they can be proficient on an American-made small arm, they can be trained to be proficient on a foreign-made small arm fairly quickly. The differences aren't that vast. They can be taught the differences, the nuances for the different weapon systems, and they can be taught to run those weapons effectively. I have no doubt about that. Mortar size and larger, boy, that's a whole nother deal. I mean, does the average soldier know how to zero and fire a mortar? I doubt it. An artillery piece? Nope. There's a whole lot of mathematics that goes into that, and I don't think anyone understands. Sure, you could get the thing to fire, but could you fire over the horizon and hit a target that you can't see? Highly unlikely. There's a lot of mathematics that goes into that. But maybe if the question is, if you take a team that's already trained up on artillery, an artillery unit in the U.S. Army, could they be retrained to run Soviet artillery in a fairly quick manner? Maybe, if we had the right training school, they could. It's probably a little bit outside of my realm to answer, but I think I'll leave it at that at this point. Definitely with small arms, though, I agree with Brent. Most U.S. personnel are not familiar with foreign small arms. However, they could be spun up on it pretty quick. And I'll tell you, I see a lot of comments in the comments section where there seems to be a lot of kind of defense over the AK and some of these other platforms that are out there. Les, I agree with you 100%. There's no doubt about it. When foreign units have the access to American-made weapons and equipment, they typically choose those over what they already have. We've seen that with country and country and country again. Look at all the NATO units that were involved in our latest conflict in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. When they have access to American-made weapons, it seems like they pick those up for whatever reason.
Well said. Well said. I agree with everything that's been said here. American troops don't really have any knowledge of, especially Soviet bloc weaponry. Everything I learned from Bruce before I went to boot camp. So thank you, Bruce. I was actually able to pass on the knowledge you gave me to my Marines when I got to Fallujah, and was able to pick up an AK-47 and show my Marines how to field strip it, break it down, and things like that. So no, you're right. It's not hard. It's just taking the time and having the resources. I know when I was on ship going from Japan to Iraq during the Fallujah campaign, we asked around. We asked the Navy SEALs, "Hey, you guys got an AK we can use so I can teach my Marines how to do it?" Just finding these weapons outside of the civilian world is very difficult in the U.S. military. So having those resources at, say, the battalion level might not be a bad idea.
So let me pine in, and yeah, I like Brent. I was fortunate enough to go to the threat weapons course for the U.S. Army at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, and you know, it's been so long, I honestly don't remember. I think it was a 2-week course. It might have been a 3. What I do remember is that we were all together for the first week, where we learned rather exhaustively the Kalashnikov, the AKM specifically, and then SKS Simonov, the PKM. And we, got to look at an SVD. We didn't even get the FAM fire, the SVD. We got the familiarization fires on the others. The other week or weeks, we went and specialized in other things, right? And you didn't do the same one. You went off to tanks or armored vehicles. You went off to air defense. You went to artillery. You went to nuclear biological WMD. And I remember where somebody speaking up saying, "Why don't we study all of those? Why do we specialize?" And this is how they broke it down. They said, "Well, we needed to show you what you were going to bump into on the battle space as combat soldiers, so we taught you direct fire systems. Now, indirect fire systems kill 70%, or they take 70% of battlefield casualties are inflicted by indirect fire systems. That's your artillery, your mortars, your rockets, all that stuff. Of the 30% of battlefield casualties that are taken by direct fire systems, 70% of that 30% is taken by crew-served weapons. This means that we can argue about rifles, and rifles are critically important. I'm not trying to downplay their contribution to the battle space, but you can see real quick who's playing out and where your combat power is. Right? So you got to look at the other systems. And when I got to the air defense, that's what I spent the rest of the time doing, was learning Soviet and Eastern Bloc air defense systems. That's one of the things they brought up to bear, is that they said, look, if your aircraft can't bring in supplies, if they can't bring in reinforcements, it doesn't matter how good your gun is. So keep that in mind. And I think the bigger picture here is what Brent was getting into, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that our forefathers fought in World War I with inferior weapon systems. They fought in World War II with inferior weapon systems. They fought in Korea with some inferior, some better, but kind of an even match. And only in Vietnam did they start to gain some appreciable edge. And not so much on the ground, but because of the air dominance over South Vietnam. Since the Persian Gulf War, so what I'm saying is we trained in the 80s to believe we're not going to have the upper hand, not against peer. But after the Persian Gulf War, and you got to remember, I started my military career in the middle of the 1980s. And after the Gulf War of 91, we trained as if we would always have superiority. We'd have air dominance. We'd have information dominance. We'd have ground dominance. We're going to have logistics dominance. It's insane that we trained constantly like this. How many people in the military today know what an SOI CEOI is? Probably not very many people. They're like, what the hell is that? It's your communication security. And they're like, oh, why didn't you just say SINCGARs? Because we didn't trust SINCGAR. Okay, guys? So who has the better radio can come down to who wins this fight. And Americans are so accustomed to having better everything that I wonder, are our warriors ready to fight against a peer?
in there, Abner.
Yeah, I agree with you, Brent. Believing that most of our troops are not familiar with former Warsaw Pact firearms. I agree with that. And I think that's where our special operations community really shines. They have the opportunity to go to that 1 week course or 2 week course and get familiar with all that stuff versus, you know, the larger body of our military where they don't. And again, they're specialized. They only get to focus on their particular firearm. So yes, I agree there. As for our main fighting rifle here in the U.S., there's a lot of people have reservations about it, and some people believe that it's the greatest thing. And that's perfectly fine. But I actually spoke to an Alpha FSB guy through Instagram, and he told me we talked back and forth, and I asked, what do you guys think about the AR-15, the M4 carbine? He says, we love it. We love that rifle. We just can't use it because who runs the show over there? The state, right? The Russian government. So they're not allowed to use it. But he said, we would love to use it. We actually like the 5.56 bullet. So that really whoa, it's really strange because what we hear from the state, Russia, their propaganda is like, we have the best, we have the greatest. But then you get to meet these people who have served in the military there, by happen chance, right? And they say, no, we actually like it. It's really good. The recoil is great. The recoil impulse, it's in line, and we get really great shots. It's very accurate, light recoil. He loved it. So it's really interesting to hear these different points of views. What else? And again, like what Bruce said, we can train up our regular troops real fast. Again, our special operations, they have a 1 week course with all that stuff, or 2 week. Give them the same thing and at least get them familiar. They don't need to dump hundreds and thousands of rounds, right? And get that qual. Just get them familiar with it, and they should be good to go.
Yeah, I think it's funny, UT. I want to say from you, or I heard you talk about it one time, but the perspective of the AK-74 SU or the Korean Call, it was, those guys hated that a little bitch. And anybody here in the States, at least on the AK side of the house, is infatuated with that too. I think it's a great little gun, but over there, like the Russian troops are like, oh, I don't want this little short piece of shit. I want a full size rifle.
That's true. That's true. That's why the 74U basically it got removed from the big army. It's now used by police forces. It makes sense. I would agree to that because it's a 200-yard gun and I think it would work. It works great for that purpose for the police forces. But as for a frontline troop, you don't want that. They would like the story has it is they would ditch it if they can find a 74 full length. They'll magically or somehow lose their 74U and grab a full size 74. Better yet, they would try and get the folding stock version, but those were generally for the mechanized troops and the paratroopers. But if they could get a full length 74, they would always trade it because they don't want the bad guy. They don't want the enemy to get into 200 yards, right? You want the standoff capability. So anytime they had the chance to ditch the 74U, boom, they'd get that 74. But here, like you said, everyone loves it. And it's a great PDW. I love mine. And for within the confines of where I live, where Brent, where you live, Bruce, within basically the width of a street, right? Building to building, distance wise. Yeah, sure. Why not? Red dot, good to go. But anything past that, I'm going to tell you right now, I've tried hitting 200 yards with that.
Sorry to cut you off, man. Matt's got to drop out. Can you jump on real quick and then we'll go back to you?
Yeah. But go ahead.
I was gonna say thanks everybody. Been a pleasure talking to you. And I guess I had to throw one last comment. I've been seeing that in the chat as well, and I agree with it. Is that the hardware is interesting. It is. It's fun to talk about because it's the easy thing to talk about. The hard part is going to be training and tactics and the right way to use it. So that's my last bit. Thanks everybody. Have a great evening.
Thanks for coming on, brother. it's Wednesday, right?
Yep, Wednesday night, and I believe it's 8:30 East, or no, 8 o'clock Eastern. I had to move it. So yeah, 8 o'clock Eastern at Everyday Marksman. So all right, thanks.
Yeah, everybody check it out. We'll be on here. Have a good night, brother.
You too.
All right, back to you, UT. Thanks, bud.
But like I said, it's a great platform for 200 and in. I've tried to shoot 200 yards steel like consistently. It's not easy. It's difficult with those sights. No, it's not. So.
Jump in there, John.
I mean, kind of like what everybody's already said, we can go round and round about the guns and what's best and what's not best, but I would just say the best one's going to be the one that you got in your hands whenever you need it, as long as it works. I mean, it ain't going to really matter if you're on the receiving end of it and it's somebody that knows what they're doing with it. As far as all of our troops knowing, it's kind of like a buddy of mine was bringing up. To what extent and what level do our troops really need to know hands-on with, OPFOR equipment? I mean, to what level and what extent? Does it hurt for them to be familiar with, AKs, etc.? No, probably not. But I mean, the chances of them, realistically speaking, actually having to pick one up and use it are probably pretty low, I would say, especially in widespread military. I mean, we've got specialized units, obviously, that cross-train on everything. But, large line infantry units, if they're having to rely on picking up foreign weapons, we got bigger issues going on from a logistics and supply concern. So, how much time and energy do we need to really put on them learning the foreign stuff? Not saying they don't, asking the question, to what extent do they need to?
Okay, I'm gonna jump in here. I got a personal story to tell involving foreign weapon usage. And it's kind of going to be a two-part. So it's like, yes, our guys need to know foreign weapon systems, but at the same time, I'm not asking for the individual to know how to use, Russian-built mortar systems, right? But our capabilities and limitations. And an example of that would be when you go to One Shepherd and you're in an FTX, and this is something any one of you experience by going to One Shepherd, right? There are FTXs that have indirects written into the measle sometimes, and you have to take that into consideration for your planning, whether that's going on the offense. If you're asked, you get a frago where you got to conduct an attack, or if you're establishing a defense, you have to be playing to those capabilities, right? If you know that the enemy has indirect fire assets, well, by God, your guys got to dig in. They got to have overhead cover, right? If you know that you have indirect fire allocated to you at a certain time frame, and you're not going to have them outside of that time frame, well, you got to coordinate your attack time frame. Okay, so that plays in. It brings a whole new spectrum of thinking, and knowing the capabilities and limitations of your enemy's weapon systems, i.e., their fire assets. How far is their range? If we know the enemy, has indirect fire in a certain AO, know their range of their weapon systems that they utilize, well, we can establish our staging area in this area and have relative safety from indirect fire attack in our staging area here. It's just one example. So like when I'm talking about our weapon system, I'm not exactly saying, hey, our individual infantrymen need to know how to use these enemy mortar systems. But I wanted to share a personal story, and this was the Battle of Najaf. My platoon at the time was on a react at FOB Hotel, Forward Operating Base Hotel in Najaf. And what happened was a Huey got shot down, and a Marine Corps Huey was shot down and punch out. We punched out there to set up a cordon around this down Huey, thinking Black Hawk down, right? But we rolled out there And I believe we only had 600 rounds for our 240 at the time. Now, you remember, this is React. This isn't some offensive operation that we planned for. We had a 5-paragraph order. We conducted rehearsals. No, this is none of that. This was, we just came back from a patrol. We just took over React. We have our weapons staged. Half the guys were jerking off in porta shitters. The other half were taking showers, and it's like, oh crap. We just got a call. We got to roll. Mount up at the vehicles, grab your gear, let's roll. We had guys roll out there with half teens. This was React. This was a Huey just got shot down. We got to get out there because the enemy's pushing and they're going to overrun that position. They're going to overrun. They're going to kill those pilots. So we rolled out there and we set up a cordon, or effectively set up a cordon around this down bird, and the enemy was hitting our cordon the whole time. It got to the point where we captured an enemy. We overran a enemy machine gun position. This was a spade gripped PK machine gun. I had never seen it before. This is Lance Corporal Downing at the time. All right. They threw this thing over a wall when they cleared the building that it was in. And funny thing, it actually hit a corpsman on the other side of the wall, but that's a whole nother topic. But when it did that, it jacked up the tripod. So in any event, I saw this, and they had a belt of about 200 rounds of 7.62 by 54R length for this machine gun. And they brought it back to the track, and they were throwing it in the back of the track. And I said, hey, I went to the platoon commander. I said, hey, there's about 200 rounds for that gun. Can I try to get that up and running so that we can use it? Because we only have about 400 rounds left in our 240. And I want to get this so that we have it. We have something we can keep in the fight. And the platoon commander said, can you figure this out? I said, I'm a machine gunner. I could probably figure this out. And I tried to get this gun up and running. I mean, this thing was very ghettoized. It had a string attached to the bolt, and there was no sights on it. And long story short, I did not have the familiarity with the tripod or the gun itself to get this thing up and running. The tripod was jacked up from being thrown over the pole, and it got to the point where I'm looking at this. I mean, this is a completely different machine gun. The rounds are feeding from the right side as opposed to the left side. And I had never seen this thing before. We did not have a foreign weapons, class before we went into Iraq. My second deployment. So I could not get this thing up and running. We had to take it and we had to throw it in the track. So that was 200 rounds of enemy captured linked ammunition that I could have put through this PK spade gripped machine gun to help facilitate us keeping suppression on this road for an extended period of time. And I could not get that gun up and into the fight. So I feel that if I was in that same situation now, here first sergeant Downing, freaking 20 years later, I could get that machine gun up and running, and I could have employed it properly. So that's my that I would like to share, because that actually was involving a captured enemy weapon that I was trying to use to enhance our situation on the battlefield.
Yeah, and I can speak to that a little bit myself personally. When we were in Fallujah, we carried AKs. Every Marine had an AK because we would use it to shoot the door locks off, because a 5.56 would just shatter, putting your barrel up against the door lock and firing it. AK's got a little more punch to it. So to answer your question, John, it can sometimes be very likely that you're going to pick up an enemy weapon for whatever use it might have. Having that familiarity is essential, absolutely essential. Just a little bit of familiarity with that enemy weapon system.
Yeah, so I'm going to chime in and say that I absolutely agree with that. I was disappointed that more of the threat weapons course wasn't made available to my peers. I didn't find a whole lot of people that went through that, unless, as it previously mentioned, unless you were special forces community. And that's odd, because everybody who was going through it at the time I went through it was infantry. So a little odd. But anyway, they didn't give it enough. They didn't get enough attention. I'll also note, and again, going back to Brent's story there, it is quite possible that we'll have to temporarily use the enemy's weapon systems. And I can't imagine anything more frustrating than being in a fight of life and death and not knowing how to use the damn weapon. So, yeah, and it's such a low lift. This is not high cost. This isn't anything. Here's what bothers me, though, about it systematically. Let's not look at it at an individual level. Systematically, you can find films on YouTube from World War II and Korea talking about the enemy's weapons. What do those Germans have? What do those Japs have? Here's how to take out a Jap tank. Here's how to take out a German tank. Hey, the German machine gun is better than yours, but is it really? It runs a hot barrel. And they talk about the vulnerabilities of the enemy weapon systems, even when being honest about, hey, they have a higher rate of fire than you. And they've got at least as good, if not better, range than you. But here are their vulnerabilities. And I think that's the sort of information that is incredibly useful to the American fighting man. Then I think that's what we need to get back to. Once again, it seems like after Vietnam, it became propaganda. And I don't know if it was that the American military believed the propaganda or if it was just that the Soviets were that damn good at the propaganda. Either way, we were told that AKs were wonder weapons from space aliens, and their tanks can do cartwheels, and they float and make soft serve ice cream out the back end of them. I mean, it was just the most ridiculous claims in the world looking back on it. But I will tell you that we were all very nervous in the 1980s going, oh my God, their jets are better than ours. Their tanks are better than ours. Their artillery is better than ours. And it was propaganda. It was bullshit. And you find this out in 1991. And then after that, the story changed. Oh, don't worry about their stuff. It's all made of paper. It's all dissolvable. It's biodegradable. It's plastic and paper. And we gave you the best in the world. I'm like, okay, we went from one end of the pendulum all the way to the other end. Guys, the truth is probably found somewhere in the middle. And again, I'm babbling on and on. What I'm saying is systematically or systemically, it bothers me that we don't have an education program for our warriors to say, here's where your threat weapons really excel. Here's where they're vulnerable, and here's how to compromise those weapon systems based on their vulnerabilities.
I want to piggyback off of what Doc said about how there's all those training films back in World War I, World War II, Korea, and I have to reference Saving Private Ryan when they were about to attack the old radar station. What did Tom Hanks' character say? Wait for him to change out his barrels, and then rush. Makes sense.
And just to clarify, I wasn't saying that our guys shouldn't know. I was legit asking, is that something we really need to widespread do? So, I mean, obviously Brent makes a great case for it just based on his own personal experience. So I'm not against it at all. Personally, I love knowing as much about everything as I possibly can, but I'm not big Army or big Marine Corps. So.
Well, I think it would make sense if you were big Army or big Marine Corps and you knew that you were going into a specific area to conduct combat operations on large scale, like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan. We'll just use those for example. That maybe having teams in place that can spool up frontline troops on foreign weapon systems, particularly small arms, and the safe handling thereof is probably a pretty good idea. I'm not sure what Brent and Chad, your guys, well, all of you veteran, your guys' procedures were for finding things like ordnance, like hand grenades, but obviously understanding the safe handling of those would probably be beneficial as well.
Hey,
Oh, yeah,
I saw real quick. I saw in the chat a guy named Kurt. He by name mentioned our platoon sergeant at the time, so I'm trying to figure out who he is. So, Kurt, who are you? Just give me your first name, brother. Sorry, John. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Apparently, he's an old friend. No, just going with what Bruce just said. I mean, if it was me personally and I was still in and was going to be going, oh, heck yeah, wherever I found out I was going to, I'd personally be studying up on everything I could find and research that was in theater or might possibly be in theater. But that would just be me personally. And I mean, I've been doing that since I was literally a kid. I mean, it's always all fascinated me, and I've always wanted to learn as much about all of it as I could. So.
Well, it makes sense if you're a tanker, right? If you're an American tanker and you're going in like a big war against a peer or even a near peer, and you say, okay, I need to understand their vulnerabilities. I need to understand how they work. You know, there was a time where tanks were shot out from underneath you and the crews ran away, right? And looked for another tank. What if you find an enemy tank? I mean, do you know, if your life is depending on it, how to use it? And so tankers should learn tanker stuff, including their opponent. Again, with the focus of understanding their opponent's vulnerabilities and strengths. And if I would even go so far as maybe artillery, you know, mortarmen, artillery, maybe it's a good idea for you to know how to be a cannon cocker if you're a cannon cocker with, you know, with the enemy's weapons. Again, looking at vulnerabilities, but also how to use it, just in case you ever are faced with that. And so it makes good sense that ground pounders, such as myself, know the enemy's ground pounding weapons. Now, what I'm not advocating is, first off, that everybody needs to know everything, right? But also, I'm not advocating that I need to understand how to run drive an aircraft carrier. That that a cannon cocker needs to understand, biological weapons. There's a limit, right? But I am saying that we do need to understand it. Frankly, from the small arms view, I think the American citizen soldier has more at stake because of your unconventional warfare, your irregular forces. We have more at stake. Bruce has more at stake to understand. I better understand how to shoot these bolt action rifles of the various different types, as well as Kalashnikovs and AR-15s and Steyrs, you name it. They're going to have to form into really weird pockets of resistance if it ever comes to that. And so I'd say the civilian marksman, the civilian citizen, frankly, has more to learn there. But again, getting back to the military, there's merit in knowing this, and I'm disturbed that we don't.
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty widespread. I mean, I can say almost with 100% confidence that the U.S. military really never taught me foreign weapons until I went to the foreign weapons instructor course. I'd been given before the Iraq invasion, I was given a little red pamphlet that had enemy weapon, threat weapon stuff in it. But outside of that, no, not at all. And I really didn't learn AK stuff until Chad and I started doing our own private training, running around with AKs that we purchased, civilian legal AKs, obviously. So yeah, U.S. military does a garbage job at teaching foreign weapons and threat weapons. It's not where it needs to be. And I mean, that's something we definitely need to improve on. I know the Marine Corps is kind of going to a super grunt concept, consolidate all of our MOSs and the infantry side of the house. And guys are going to cross train and essentially be the jack of all trades, master of none. But if we're going to do this, I think this is something that needs to be incorporated. Specifically, if we're going to be fighting against the Chi-Coms, we need to know their capabilities and limitations on their weapon systems.
Yeah, I would second that, Brent, because if you look historically in the battles of Korea, especially Chosin Reservoir and some of the battles right after that, many of the battles that were fought, halfway through the battle, the Marines are picking up enemy weapons to continue the fight. Now, luckily, in those battles, a lot of the enemy weapons were just former U.S. aid given to them, so they were trading one Tommy gun for another. But the point of it is, it shows you can have the situation where you're dependent on enemy weapons. A more recent example would be down in the Falklands. Had the unique situation where both sides were essentially using the same weapons, but when the British marched into Stanley and, okay, we've conquered, now we're going into garrison mode, and they start turning things in and realize, hey, we're turning in lots of Argentine ammo and grenades and not very many of our own. So having a concept of what your enemy has and how to employ it is valuable training and should be integrated into the training curriculum without a doubt.
Well, I guess you know, we can kind of wrap this up. What about civilians? You know, I personally, I think not just U.S. military, but I think, you know, Second Amendment enthusiasts. I mean, learn these other weapons. I mean, all these common weapons that are out here. I'm not going to say that AKs are as popular as ARs. That's probably a fallacy, just because the mass production of ARs that we've seen in the last 10, 15 years. But regardless, there is a numerous amount of AKs out there, and I know Abner, I know you're a big AK guy. I mean, when I first met you, that's kind of what your thing was, man. You were the AK guy. that's all you shot. You kind of migrated towards getting in bed with ARs over the years, also in addition to your AKs. But let's kick that around for a few minutes. We're almost hitting 2 hours, and we can wrap this up. But my stance is, you know, if you're a Second Amendment guy, like, you should know these other weapon systems, particularly AKs. And if we go back to the whole Red Dawn thing, somebody had brought it up. I think it might have been John, but it's like, you're probably not going to start the scenario with what you have right now. Maybe it was Bruce, but you're probably going to end up with something. It's very unlikely that you're going to end up, you know, down the road when you're in the mountains in your little guerrilla group with the weapon that you started training with, or you think you're going to be using.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, Brent. That I think that was a point that I made, and a shout out to Abner. I keep seeing a lot of chat talking about the SKS, and maybe a few guys are kind of poking fun at it. But I'll tell you this: I've seen UT-74 run an SKS, and I would rather go up against the average American with an AR than UT-74 with an SKS. Not because the SKS is by any means superior, but because training is more important than the tool that's put in your hand. If you're good with what you've got, you're more dangerous than somebody that's bad with a superior weapon or poorly trained with a superior weapon. And I think that's the key thing to point out here. Training supersedes weapon systems, particularly when it comes to small arms. It's always been the case, and it's still the case today. Now, saying that, there's no reason as an American that you don't have the ability to train and get experience on multiple platforms of weapon systems. You might not have the financial ability to own one. Maybe you just got an SKS. That's all you could afford 15 years ago. That's fine. No problem with that. You're going to know somebody in the gun world, like any of these guys you see in front of you, that own AR-15s, own AK platforms, own various foreign weapon systems, that'll be more than happy, if you're a cool, level-headed guy, to take you out to the range, show you how to safely operate them, and let you get proficient with them. I know I would, and I can speak for almost all of these guys in front of me. They would too, because that's what kind of guys they are. We don't have those firearms hid away so nobody can see them. We love showing them off. We love showing you guys how to go out and shoot them, show the differences between them, getting you spun up on training, and particularly safety. I went out to the range just this past weekend, taught a guy that had very little experience in shooting. He bought his first handgun. We got him spun up on safety and got him shooting the 5 ring at 7 yards out on a private range. It was his first time out getting any type of instruction at all. I do it all the time. It's no problem. And I know all these other guys, they get out and they shoot and they train as well. One Shepherd, once you get spun up, obviously you can go to a class like that, or SNS Training Solutions, or any number of other classes that are out there, and continue to expand your knowledge. But as an American, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to get spun up on training of a few different foreign weapons. And why I say that is this: if you can run an SKS and you can run an AR and you can run an AK, you can get 90% of the small arms in the world up and running and hitting targets without much training or experience at all.
And the SKS is still a pretty viable option if you're living in the commie states, right?
Yeah, your SKSs and M1 Garands are COMI compliant, yet while obsolescent are by no means obsolete.
Now, I'll piggyback on what Bruce said. Years ago, way back in the day, I used to shoot in a defensive-oriented competition group, and we had guys. Because again, this was way back, like late '90s, early 2000s. SKSs were plentiful and cheap. Ammo was plentiful and cheap. It's all a lot of guys could afford, and they would come and compete. And again, it wasn't like modern day technical competition. It was very defensive oriented. These guys could run SKSs in ways that would, you better respect what they could do with one. You on the other end of somebody that's experienced with one and knows what they're doing, they'll put a hurting on you, put the fear of God in you at the very least. But I also find it funny that so many people get so wrapped up in they get so biased against one or the other, AR, AK, SKS, whatever. Like I just saw somebody in the chat a minute ago, you couldn't give me an AR-15. Whatever. You're just showing your ignorance at that point. We've already had people right here telling you that freaking Russian SF would take ARs if they could get them. Okay? Americans have bought into this hype that the AR sucks and the AK is, like handed down from God himself. And then you get people that are on the flip side of that AKs are junk commie crap that can't hit the broadside of a barn and ARs are it. You're all wrong. You better learn how to run all of them and respect all of them. Because in the right hands, the person that knows what he's doing, it won't matter which one he's got in his hands. You're going to be in trouble. Just saying.
And B93 brought up a good point. I guess maybe our age shows a little bit. Yeah, SKS used to kind of be the stepping stone, right? Like it was cheap and it was plentiful, and your first rifle was an SKS, and then down the road you would graduate to an AR or an AK. But yeah, the surplus has dried up. You can still probably get a Chicom Type 56 for Bruce. You just bought one pretty recently. What was that?
Yeah, I mean, you can get a beat up one for probably in the US for $350. And I mean, when in the 90s, everybody says this, I got them for $100 brand new. Those days are long gone. And yeah, if they're $350 for a beat up one now, and you can get into an entry level AR for $500, guys are saying, why would you choose an SKS over an AR? That's not really the point. The point is just that it doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything. Winchester 3030. I don't know what's cheap that's out there, but the training is more important than the platform itself. And that given the choice, if I'm going to have someone shooting at me, I would prefer an untrained person with a very expensive high-end firearm than a trained person with something that they drug out of their dad's attic. That's the point that I was trying to make there. Training beats technology when it comes to small arms.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to back that up, to show good training, just last week out at Desert Brutality, Jenny Koskamaski was there, and she is the top female shooter from Finland. Comes over, is handed a pistol and a rifle she's never shot before, with a sighting system on them that's not zeroed to her, that she's never dealt with before, and on the clock proceeds to smoke just about everybody there. If you have skill, the weapon is secondary.
Yeah, but the special forces use X, Y, and Z, and I say, yeah, but the special forces also use bolt action rifles and still did fabulous raids and pulled off one miracle after another with bolt action rifles and and cowboy pistols. The point is, it doesn't. I get why the special forces are your hallmark. Let's all look what tier one's doing. Let's do that and copy that, because if we look like them, we must be as good as them. That's not how this works. I wish, but it doesn't. You can't buy your way into tier one. You can't.
And even the tier 1 guys will tell you what makes them tier 1 is usually because they've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours mastering the basics. They just do the basics really, really good.
Yeah, 100%, John. Hey, guys, we're almost at 2 hours, so let's go around the horn. We'll wrap it up. Again, you can comment over any of the 2 topics we talked tonight. You can also pimp your own channel or whatever you got coming down the pipe. I don't care. Let's just go around the horn. Start with John. Hit it.
I would just say what I always say even on my own channel. Pay attention to what's going on in the world. Don't stick your head in the sand. Don't panic, run around like a chicken with your head cut off. Don't freak out. Just be watchful, be mindful, and follow the old Boy Scout adage and, be prepared. It's not an overly complex thing. Watch what Russia and China are doing. Watch the bigger economic picture. Don't let your biases creep into your thinking when at all possible. And when it comes to the weapon side of stuff, learn everything you can and don't rule something out just because you don't particularly like it. Because whether you like it or not doesn't mean it might not be good in somebody else's hands. I don't know what I got coming up. I got a whole laundry list of stuff. I just got to figure out if I got time to get to any of it and do it. So I'm not going to spill too much on what I got coming because I don't really know what I got coming.
Well, John nailed it there. So I'm just going to say I agree with everything he just said. As far as what's coming down the pike, right now, if you tune into my channel, I am putting up coverage of Desert Brutality, which was an awesome match. It was a real test of skills and physicality and had a lot of military-based scenarios in it. So if you're looking for realistic training and a way to test your training on the clock, brutality matches are a way to do it. And with that being said, May 14th and 15th, Woodland Brutality will be held at Echo Valley Training Center. So when the registration opens up, everybody sign up and come on out.
I agree with when it comes to the civilian side of training. Don't dismiss a firearm because of lore or this person said this or that person said this. Get your hands dirty. Like Brent said, I used to run AKs all the time. And my brother, who's in law enforcement, he's big AR, and he just said, hey, you need to work on this. So I just went ahead and embraced it. And now I own several ARs. So absolutely. Being as civilians, we have the opportunity to cross-train. We have the ability to expand our knowledge. We don't have the confines like government agencies do and military structure. We don't have those confines. So learn as much as we can. Absolutely. Totally agree. As for things coming down the pipe for me, I'm not, gassing hard as of late. I'm doing much better with my health. I'm really focusing on my health, guys. I've lost weight. I feel great. Been doing some big changes in my life. But right now, you guys have probably seen I got my KP9 SBR suppressed, and I'm really working on fine tuning. Getting the suppressed bullets, the subsonic bullets, just right for that system. And today I got a battle belt that I'm going to set up just particularly for that rifle. And I may or may not share that info or, the end product when I get it completed on my YouTube channel. So we'll see, but that's it.
Okay, so a couple of house cleaning. First is that I just realized John has a camouflage Kalashnikov hiding in that gear. I just kept seeing a brown clump of gear, and I was thinking, what in the world? And sure enough, he has a rifle there. Secondly, Les is talking about Woodland Brutality. His company, Polaris, is sponsoring that, bringing that out to Echo Valley. For those who don't know, the Echo Valley Training Center is a hop, skip, and a jump from Dulles Airport right here in Washington, D.C. So it's on the West Virginia side, but it's very, very close. So that's where you want to fly in. As for me, okay, so here's the one thing. I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, but when we talked about threat weapons, we got there. Then we started talking about, okay, the civilian side of the house, got that. And I think we all agree training is critical. And this is what's always bothered me is that there's not the opportunity for our civilian counterparts to get crew served weapon training in. Hear what I said, crew served weapon. All right. So if you guys vote for me to become Emperor of the Universe, then as soon as I'm Emperor, here's my program. And my program is that I will take, what you guys don't know is that every September at the end of the military fiscal year, there's all these munitions left over. And I will take those munitions left over. I will move them to National Guard sites across the country, and I will host mortar crews, rocket crews, machine gun crews at your local, National Guard ranges, National Guard posts, so that I can specifically train. I will give that to any civilians that walk up and say, hey, the 3 of us were a machine gun crew. Hey, the 5 of us were a mortar crew. Hey, the 2 of us were a rocket crew. Fine, I got munitions if you've got the launcher. So like I said, vote for me for Emperor of the Universe. And one other promise, it's not there yet, but I'll get it. I'll get you sex robots. Okay.
Always back to the sex robots. Good conversation, gents. I don't really have much to add to that. Just piggybacking off what John said, I would definitely recommend that everybody pay attention to what's going on out there. Russia, China. It's not going to be. We've got our work cut out for us as Americans. Just real quick, again, I'd like to point this out. This is a great read. Anybody who's interested in Russia or its leader, this is a very insightful book on Putin and his personality. I would definitely recommend it to anyone who's interested.
All right, guys. So I'll cover both of the topics today. First of all, I never miss an opportunity, being a child of the 80s, to poke the bear in the eye. So go Ukraine. You know where my support is. For all you communities out there, life's hard. And in terms of small arms on the civilian side, the military side, I made my position known, but guys, don't forget, reach out, network out to some locals in your area. If you want to train on some different weapon systems, or just network with other guys that are like-minded, chances are they're as open-minded and looking for good friends and other good Americans as you are. Network in. Don't be afraid to reach out and get that training and experience that you need. This isn't a financial, any type of financial commitment. Chances are guys will, if you pay for ammo, they'll let you shoot their stuff. And I know for me, I'm more than happy to have guys clean weapons for me. So I'll train you on how to clean them, because at my age, I've cleaned so many weapons. It's not something I really look forward to anymore. So don't hesitate to take advantage of networking within locals of your own area.
Yeah, man. Bruce and Doc are sure hard to follow up. I don't know. Between his Emperor of the Universe and his gay porn name. Anyways, guys, I thought this was a great stream. Man, we've had a lot of viewers in here. 400. We've just now dropped down to 300, but we've had 400 people in here for the most part, better part of the stream. So that's pretty impressive. That's probably one of the most we've had ever in their live stream history here. Short, but in any event, I just want to remind everybody, it is Cyber Monday. There's a lot. I've seen multiple emails now from deals for ammunition, weapons, stuff like that. So, the clock is ticking come midnight. So make sure you get out there. If you need ammunition, it's probably going to be your best bet is to take advantage of those Cyber Monday deals. Because prices are through the roof. That's what's going to happen when we got communists running our federal government right now. So, do what you can. So again, just a reminder, take advantage of that stuff while you can, guys. I know money's tight for you. Piggybacking on what the other guys say, keep an eye out for what's going on around the world. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. And unfortunately, these foreign leaders are looking at the United States in a weak manner, and they're going to take advantage of that. So I I hate to say this, but guys, we have tough times ahead of us. So do your part, train, go to places like One Shepherd, SNS Training Solutions, any other reputable training facility. Take those classes, take those courses, get your weapons, get your ammunition, stock up, take advantage of these deals when you get them. And man, just pay attention to what's going on in the world. Don't be a hermit. All right. So outside of that, guys, I think this has been a very large and successful stream. I appreciate everybody jumping on tonight and contributing to this. Again, we had, I paid for subscription so I can host up to 10 freaking guests now. So that might be a little bit too much to handle, but I definitely like, being able to bring guys into here and not having to ask people to sit out. So I appreciate the contributions for everybody in this stream tonight. So anybody got any save rounds before we close it out tonight?
Yeah, I'll vote for Doc on one concession. Getting the stuff for us to shoot and practice with is not enough. I want to own it. If you make it so that I can own it privately, you got my vote.
Doc,
There we go.
Doc had me with sex robots and the possibility to cameo in another video. So I don't care about the weapon stuff at all. I'm here for the fun.
I also wanted to add, I forgot to mention, for the whole global situation, there's a nice saying I picked up. I forgot from the interview, but it's think globally, act locally.
Oh, and one other thing, if I can, Brent, just to piggyback on what you said about the training side of it. In addition to what you mentioned, a couple other good places, brush beater and alert plan training systems. Both of those good training opportunities.
All right, guys. That's it. I appreciate everybody tuning in tonight. Have a good night.